It's Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. in Switzerland, and it's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café WebTalk 33 minutes with Dr. Jessica West will begin soon. And thanks for joining us for our talk today about making space for peace, how the civil society participates in space governance. We always appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. That is very valuable for us and help us to improve. I'm Torsten Kriening, your host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. And we are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. Something very cool to say, our new episode 21 released today in the morning features Neve. Neve is called, is it pronounced correctly? Dr. Neve Shaw, a wonderful story to listen to. We also keep our fan shop open online for you to support us actively and become a space watcher. Edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. Your support is needed to keep our work alive, and we do that for you. If you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and later on YouTube. We host our Space Café web talks live on a weekly basis, and this is already our 45th edition today. So a year can go that fast, or if you're at home and can't do anything else. Today, I'm super excited to have one more very good friend and someone I admire for her outstanding and absolute needed work on my show. A very warm welcome, Dr. Jessica West. Jessica is a senior researcher at the Canadian Peace Research Institute, Plowshares, as you can see it here, where her work on space security brings her into regular contact with UN bodies and experts from around the world. She also serves as a long-term editor on the Space Security Index report. And Jessica holds a PhD in global governance and international security. From the, and now is it Balesel School? I know I cannot make it. How is it correctly pronounced?
It's the Balsillie School.
Exactly.
And it can be a mouthful.
And I want to say where your PhD is about. It's in parallel between the national strategies of resilience and medical models of disease containment. And that's certainly very timely these days. And once more, welcome, Jessica, to my show. Please, let's kick that off and just start and tell us a bit about Plowshares projects. I mean, it's a cool name, but what is behind it?
Yes, Project Ploughshares. We are a dedicated peace research institute located in Canada. And from our position in civil society, we work with churches, with governments, private sector, and civil society organizations in Canada, but also internationally, with the aim of advancing efforts to prevent war and armed conflict and to build peace. And I think we're turning 45 years old this year. So we've really been a persistent presence and a persistent voice in these discussions for a long time and built up a lot of expertise along the way. I'm blessed really to have wonderful colleagues who work with me on fascinating topics, pressing topics, including nuclear disarmament, lethal autonomous weapons, which is another mouthful, aka killer robots, the use of surveillance technologies, the Canadian arms trade, and we try to link all of this to questions about human security.
Okay, how many people do you have in the project, in the institute?
There are 3 dedicated researchers, myself, Bronca Marianne, Kelsey Gallagher, and our executive director, Cesar Jaramillo, who probably a lot of people are familiar with. And then we have our support staff. So we're a small team. We're usually given the wonderful opportunity to have students working with us as paid interns. And yeah, we're small but nimble, and hopefully we're good at what we do. I think we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was very pleased to hear that you pay your students. That's great.
Yes, absolutely.
But such a small team and such a focused work. So how did Plugshare become engaged in the topic of space? Or because for a peacekeeping or peace research organization, it's not obvious. At least it wasn't. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it wasn't obvious. Our involvement really started around 2003. We were approached by the Canadian government to start looking at this topic from our position in civil society. And it was a time when there was quite fervent debate in Canada about the potential for weaponization of space, something that had been rather theoretical, but at a time where there was growing concerns linked to growing focus on ballistic missile defense. And rather than looking at this topic very narrowly, we joined with other organizations to create the Space Security Index with the goal of linking those questions about conflict and potential weaponization to pressing issues related to safety and sustainability and the values of the Outer Space Treaty. And really, we tried to, I think, work broadly with a coalition of individuals and organizations to promote awareness and education and to support constructive dialogue internationally. Mm-hmm. I think this type of collaborative work and focus on fact-based research, education, and dialogue continues to reflect the way that we as an organization work today. And really, it's a great example of, I think, the role of civil society in space governance, but also in security governance writ large. And for someone with a PhD in global governance, I should be able to say that word more smoothly.
I mean, we have this 33 minutes program, but just take your time. I mean,
oh yeah, I'm a fast talker.
We have all the time. When I'm thinking about you, I'm thinking immediately about norms and behaviors, because that's where we can see you on a number of events or talking about norms of behaviors in outer space, of course, not military space, and of course being a proud Canadian. So I hope that's okay for you. That's the impression I have. So how and why you became involved in the work of outer space? Because your PhD is, as we said before, in another direction. I mean, it's super specific.
Well, so I was working at Project Ploughshares on topics related to space security before I went back to do my PhD. And I would say that was definitely a theoretical project that was really focused on the values and the strategies that I find to be recurring in the pursuit of national security and national defense. And so I think it's related because, to me, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we kind of end up having a lot of the same conversations over and over. And we adopt new concepts such as resilience, which is really the mot du jour these days. But what I find is the security challenges and the way that we approach them in many ways are quite stable over time. And I think that applies well to space. There's a lot that we can learn from the past as we forge ahead into a new domain of human activity or new activities in this domain. And I think that ability to look at topics from an interdisciplinary perspective and to draw parallels from not only other domains of security, but other fields of practice, such as medicine, is helpful and allows us to think creatively, and I enjoy thinking creatively. And after that, I came back to Plashers, and I'm really lucky to be here. And I think to be able to rejoin the space community, which is small but growing, really an enthusiastic group of people, a very supportive community, and I think just has some of the most fascinating discussions by people from so many different disciplines and perspectives. I've never really been part of a conversation that brings so many different fields together into a single conversation. And I think that's lucky. And your show in particular, you've had so many fascinating people from different walks of life and different countries and different perspectives. And I think it really is a showcase of who we are as a community. Did you want to speak on norms, though?
Absolutely. I think we will come to that in a bit. I mean, you mentioned in your studies that you worked on the past and try to find these behaviors and norms, what will lead us to the future. But is that really something you think what is still applicable? Can we use things from the past for our future? I know that we are going off the track now a bit, but hey, that's spontaneous.
There's always lessons learned. The point of my research wasn't necessarily that what we've used in the past is a great guide to the future, but more the fact that there are enduring strategies that I have found. And so the one I was focused on was the strategy of containment, the effort to try to stop things from spreading and to maintain control over processes and events. And I traced that back to the plague and to the concept of containment. And the word is going to escape me because it's in French, and I'm tired. But
come on, it's
the barriers that were built to try to keep things out. And I sort of traced the evolution of a single strategy over time, and it shifts and it moves in deeper into the body and the body politic through both medicine and security. But the overall tools and mechanisms that we use, that we see echoed in space, the ability to detect and surveil what is happening for early warning purposes, and then to be able to react and stop the spread of an event or stop the escalation of an event, continue to echo today. And so I guess I was just trying to say, not everything is always new and different. And even though we say we're doing something new, doesn't necessarily mean we are. And what lessons can we take from the past to inform our strategies today, including the limitations of those strategies?
Absolutely. Interesting link to get back or to the plug. But I mean, we know each other for quite some time, and we at our SpaceWatch.Global, we had the pleasure to publish the results of your latest study on military norms in space recently. And tell us about that a bit, and what are the key findings? I mean, you alluded, I think, on that already a bit, but give us the ugly truth about that.
The ugly truth, the wonderful truth, I would find.
Oh, really?
Sure. So I've had the opportunity over the last year to study norms in space. And I focused on that because Canada, like many other countries, has as a part of its national defense policy to promote norms of responsible behavior in space. And trying to think about how we move that from a verbal commitment to action, which is not always easy. And I was lucky to get funding. The Canadian Department of National Defence has a wonderful program called MINDS that stands for Mobilizing Insights in National Defence, and they fund policy work. And so with my colleague Gilles Doucette, another Canadian, but with a military background, we set out to create a map of existing norms. Mm-hmm. I'm getting notifications. We wanted to use this map as a way to understand where we are when it comes to existing norms of space, and how we can use that as a basis to inform moving forward on military and security related norms. And to do that, we coded about 100 documents related to space governance, looking at the kind of values and activities that they prescribe behaviors for, and the mechanisms that they suggest for implementing them. And then we also had a survey, and we also held a series of regional workshops to look at the results of our work and try to come up with options for moving forward. And I think it was actually a really positive experience. I think the first thing that stood out is that there's a really good foundation in space that we can build on. I really wasn't expecting this project to be that much work. there was an extensive array of documentation linked to space-related activities that I was really pleased to find. I'm one of those people that is always calling for more governance, more rules, more norms. And it was refreshing to realize that there's really a solid baseline that we can build on. And I think building on that baseline is important. It provides avenues for practical steps that can be taken that are already embedded in existing practices. Many are related to safety and sustainability and obligations for due regard and towards the environment and others. And I think implementing them in a military context isn't necessarily a stretch of the imagination. For example, notification practices, consultations, having better communication links with other operators. And I think what I also found that was refreshing, and I think it's important to remind the international community of, is that there is already a tradition and a foundation of military restrictions in space as well. Particularly when I looked at documents from the Cold War, we have a history of limiting military activities, not extensively, but putting some limits in place for actions that are deemed too harmful or too destabilizing. And it's really important to acknowledge that and to remember that we can do that again. We can build on that. I think in terms of what was scary or concerning, I think the research and the consultations and the surveys show that we know what the risks are, and we have a fairly good sense of some safe practices that we can implement to reduce those risks. But the mechanisms to do so are missing. And that was sort of a surprising finding for me. The means to implement good behavior aren't always there. The institutional framework for good action, the actual communication links, the procedures for notification, the means to exchange information and share data, these are missing. And I think focusing on that would be a really good way to move forward within the community.
But was there anything that, and I particularly ask about positives, surprised you in your research?
Yeah, I think positives are that, especially from a peace and say an arms control perspective, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. And I made this joke a few months ago about, using our existing norms and our existing documentation to make a norm fruit salad. So we know that we're not supposed to create a mess in outer space. We know that there are restrictions on some testing of weapons. And so pulling these different obligations together and thinking about how we can use them to make space safer and more secure for everybody, I think it's a good foundation to build on and a good way to move forward, while being aware that these conversations really do have to take place in a specific security-related setting. And the way that we do things in the security sector might not be exactly the same as the way we do it in the commercial sector and the civilian sector, but a lot of the good practices might be similar, particularly because it's a common operating domain. I'd say more so than any other domain, the integration of all of the different actors in space, the need to have a comprehensive approach, or at least a shared understanding of what the rules are, is just so important across all operators, or I think we risk sort of messing space up.
But let me ask, really precise. You said before these norms are accepted, and all the findings were agreed on. So is it in the Western world, or is it also China, Russia? I mean, the other players, so to say, in the space or scenario, including Europe, or is it just the Canada and US who said, yeah, cool, great findings?
Well, I did try to look at both the international documentation of space, but also national space laws, because that's the way that states implement what they perceive as their international obligations. And I looked across a number of countries, not just Western countries, and I think the basic obligations, debris mitigation, responsible uses, licensing, those are all fairly consistent. We did have some interesting debates, and again, I think this is why it's so important that we have the kind of conversations that the United Kingdom is promoting in First Committee. where we sit down and have a single conversation is so important. So there was an interesting debate about whether or not there's a norm against creating debris through weapons tests. And to me, it just pointed to the importance of reiterating what expected practice is, what responsible practice is, and being clear about calling out violations and also articulating what we're doing in space and why, so that we continue to reinforce the kinds of behaviors that we want to see. So what was fascinating about that is that some people said, we don't need to talk about debris and weapons testing in space. That's dealt with. That's already a norm. And other people were like, what? That it's weakening. We need to reinforce it. And so it was a really fascinating conversation, and it certainly spanned both Western and non-Western states. And it was just so insightful to see how people look at the same issue and come to different conclusions.
Okay. No. I mean, beside that, what is what you are working on today? And maybe you can elaborate a bit on the UK thing you mentioned for our audience to get it into the right context. So what makes it so different from all the others right now?
Well, yeah, the United Kingdom has been leading an effort in the United Nations First Committee, which is tasked with international security and disarmament, to talk about what kind of norms we want to see in space to reinforce security. So to prevent conflict by avoiding misperceptions and miscommunication and the kind of missteps that can lead to the escalation of a conflict, even if it's unintended, really, and to stabilize that environment. And I think what's different is not that we newly appreciate the role of norms. There have been calls for many years to work on this, particularly as a way to build trust and confidence, which many states think needs to be strengthened before we can start the conversation and the road to, say, more formal military restraints and arms control. But there's finally sort of concrete action. And their goal really is to start this conversation, to have states submit their own perspectives, and then to go from there. So the go from there hasn't happened yet. States right now are still getting their materials prepared, I hope, and submitting them to the Secretary General. And I think the United Kingdom anticipates being able to table a report on that next fall, and then to consider what the next steps will be. So I think what's exciting is that, there's action at the diplomatic level in a security context, and that it's being led and spearheaded by a state. And definitely has the support, I think, of a lot of other civil society organizations. I wish them the best. I think it's refreshing to keep talking, and I think at least having that dialogue and that conversation is a way forward and hopefully builds mutual understanding.
Yeah, it's a wise, I think, man said, as long as you talk, you don't shoot. So what else are you working on today? Anything specific you like to mention?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to be able to take the work that I did on norms, the same kind of coding and mapping exercise, to start looking at options for more formal restrictions in outer space. Maybe I'm ahead of my time, but I think that with growing focus on warfighting in space, it's really time to start thinking about what the restrictions and limitations on that kind of activity should be and will be as a tool for collective security, as something that is in everyone's best interest. And, that's not a new conversation, but again, like norms, it's a conversation that's really been stalled for a long time. We are aware of what the obstacles are. Frequently, the refrain is that space is unique, and so it's difficult to apply the same kind of thinking from other domains of arms control to space. But space is unique, and yet it has the same challenges for arms control that we faced in many other domains, a lot of the same actors and a lot of the same interests. And so I'm hoping that we can start looking at lessons learned elsewhere and maybe have a conversation about how they apply to space and how they don't, what the limits are, and just think creatively about lessons and looking towards the future.
I'm absolutely fascinated by your optimism. That swings with it, because my world today looks grey, seeing what's going on at the moment with Starlink and whatever it is, it all doesn't feel well. I mean, when you talk about norms, or in a wider sense, the basis is you're aiming for the good, but is good behavior as such, is that defined? I mean, where simply said, we don't agree on where space starts, but we should agree on what good behavior is. So how can that work together?
Well, I think we've seen other examples of where we've been able to find agreement in space, even though we might not agree on where it starts. I'm not sure that changes practice. And I think what is really the focus of norms is practice. How do we act? And I think the long-term sustainability goals were a good example of a process that worked, that started with dialogue and conversation, that started with expertise, and then that moved up to the political level. I'm not sure people want to revisit that at the moment. It was a long haul. It was a lot of work, and kudos to everybody involved. But certainly it shows that where there's a will, there's a way. But yes, I am optimistic. I like to say that optimism, I think, is a requirement for working in civil society and for working on conflict prevention and arms control. That was actually an interview question the first time I applied at Project Plowshares, was like, so, we work on topics like nuclear disarmament and things move slowly. How would you cope with working in such an environment? And really, it's about finding those small successes. It's about being part of a community and knowing that you're working in concert with one another, even if it seems that you have opposing views. Usually there's lots that we agree on, and just common goodwill, I think, from other sectors and from around the world. So I don't know. I think that keeps us going. And I think especially in the time of COVID, that keeps us going.
Maybe it also plays a role that you're Canadian and Canadians are positive. I mean, at least I perceive them as very positive and are optimistic. But let's move on with some other topics before we run out of time. We talked about this civilian protection in space, and I mean, space is far away, and except a few astronauts or on the ISS, nothing happens. It's just hardware or at least not human life. What are the human risks of a conflict in space? Or is it just what we have seen on what was it? The movie with where the ISS exploded? Gravity. Yeah. So, and why should we care about these 5 people that are in space right now?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about this because humanitarian protection, the protection of civilians, is really core to arms control and the disarmament community. It's part of our ethos and why we do our work. And you're right, it can be hard to think about why it matters if systems are damaged, if hardware is damaged in space. And I've really been trying to focus on all the ways in which that hardware is connected to people and to individuals and societies on the ground. And it's hard because it's invisible. Those connections are invisible. They flow through data and through signals. But the risks of conflict in space for civilians, it's significant. Our nuclear command and control systems run through space. And if those are damaged, we really have a risk of nuclear catastrophe. And it sounds like fear-mongering, except we've been close before. And so I would never want to say never to something like that. I would want to take action to prevent that. Debris is another one. I think debris causes indiscriminate harm. And sure, it causes harm to hardware, but on the other end of that hardware, we have pretty much the billions of people from around the world who rely on it for the internet, for communicating, for banking and shipping and agriculture and disaster warning and response. And so we're so deeply connected to space as a species, as humanity, that trying to get that message across about why it's so important to protect it from violent conflict is really critical, both to my colleagues in the arms control and disarmament communities who might not think too deeply about space, and to the space community who might not think too deeply about the need to prevent conflict.
I mean, earlier, was it this week or last week, I was reading a quote from you in an article by Teresa Hitchens in the Breaking Defense, or I think it was last week. And you, just to quote you, from an international perspective, DARPA doing anything on the moon looks bad. It raises suspicions about the intention of the US space program there, and rightfully so. Can you give us some context on this and what this project is about? Because I don't want to be so dumb and say, hey, they're building a moon base. And so, I mean, you're much deeper into that. So can you put it into the right angle, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The project itself is rather convoluted, and as far as I understand, it involves an interest to examine the potential for commercial in situ manufacturing of components of systems on the moon that might be used on the moon or in space or in lunar orbit. So it's not necessarily building a military base or building a fortification. But Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty is pretty clear about preserving the moon exclusively for peaceful purposes. That's kind of the strongest language on peaceful purposes that comes out of the treaty. It makes exceptions for the use of personnel and equipment that might be needed to advance peaceful exploration or scientific discovery. And, as in most things in life, you can always find loopholes and rationales that keep you in compliance with the law. But I think that, focusing on the letter at the expense of the Outer Space Treaty.
So not the Moon Treaty?
No, the Outer Space Treaty. No, the United States hasn't signed the Moon Treaty, so I think that would be unfair. No, the Outer Space Treaty. And, I think now when there's such focus on sort of international competition, whether it's real or rhetorical, it's important to maintain that emphasis on peaceful purposes and to really apply not only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. Because when we talk about norms, there's such a thing as negative norms. And when we allow things to slip, then over time, the interpretation of a principle can become watered down, and others can use that as well. And I think it also relates to the survey that I did in May, and you published the results of that. And we were asking people, what are your primary security concerns in space? And I was really surprised that a number of people talked about potential military competition on the moon or for resources. And I just wasn't thinking about that when I put the survey together. So the news about DARPA stuck out at that point. And really, I think it just points to the need to have a global conversation about what the limits are, how do we interpret this, and make sure that everyone's on the same page so that we don't find ourselves at a point in the future that we really didn't intend to get to. To act with purpose.
It's hard to, it's easy to say, but hard to achieve at the moment in time of COVID, where COPOS is at a still stand, or more or less, and all of the other. Surely, but steady, we're coming to an end. Let me ask two questions in one. So, do you think arms control is possible in space? And in our pre-talk, you mentioned you would like to talk about peace. So please, use the platform, and then we pick up one or two questions from the audience.
Sure. I think it's important to talk about peace in outer space. You had an excellent conversation with Doug Lavarro a few weeks ago, and it was fascinating. And he made the point that we shouldn't hope for peace. We need to plan for war. And I agree with half of his sentiment. We really we treat peace as something to hope for, something that might happen, but we don't really believe in it. And I think really peace is a way of being and existing in the world, and something that we need to plan for and prepare for and pursue with intention. And so rather than being wishy-washy about it, to me, I just think it's very important to have a conversation. Sorry, so my kids are home. Have a conversation about what it means. What does it mean in practice? What kind of limitations on our behavior does it place? How does it relate to equality and the other principles of the Outer Space Treaty? How do we implement them? How do we act in good faith with, I think, the values and the visions that people had when they put that treaty together of a common humanity in space? And don't just plan for war. If we plan for war, we're going to have war. That's my sentiment. And thinking about what peace means and how to do it is valuable. And I think arms control is one part of that. People think that arms control is all about peace, but you know what? I'm a student of both security studies and peace studies, and arms control is something we talk about in security studies, not necessarily in peace studies. It's really a tool of collective security. And I think peace is a larger vision that can guide us forward into the future, especially as our behaviors become more intense, as we have a stronger human presence in outer space. It's just a chance to not repeat some of the mistakes of the past. And hopefully countries like Canada can bring some positive ideas about that. If you're Canadian right now, the Canadian Space Agency is having a public consultation on what the future of Canada's space exploration should look like. And I think it's a wonderful time to be part of that conversation.
Great. So let's take one question or put them together. Chris and Kevin ask about the tangible outcomes from the UK initiative, or is it just the fact of the conversation significant? And Chris is seconding this question. So maybe you can give a very short answer. And Tony and Sylvia, thanks for your questions. We will send these questions to Jessica and for a written answer in the email shootout that you will get then in a few days. So, but back to the UK initiative briefly.
Yeah, the UK initiative. It's something that will take place over time, and so there's no expectation that we have sort of one quick global consultation and the answers are there. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the government, but my understanding is that this is the beginning of a process. So the concrete outcome in the fall will hopefully be a report from the Secretary General that outlines the feedback received from states about the kinds of activities that states find concerning or find threatening or that make them feel not safe in space, and hopefully also the kinds of activities that feel reassuring and that they would like to see being observed from a security perspective. Having seen the way this works in cybersecurity, but also past experiences on space, probably some sort of global group of governmental experts or, a more formal consultation process where people are brought together to start hammering out some of the ideas that might be common across states. Honestly, where that goes is political in many ways. It depends on goodwill participation of states and really prioritizing progress and prioritizing agreement over disagreement. So we don't have a lot of control over that other than to be supportive in terms of expertise and ideas, and I think to be supportive of states that do put that political emphasis on moving forward on this and trying to work with one another and really cheerleading the states that are doing that.
Time will tell.
To be a cheerleader? A peace
okay. A peace. That's right.
Champion, is that a better word?
Absolutely. Great. Thank you very much for your time. And we got the red flags from the production team already. I'm afraid we have to come to an end, or even so I would like to continue our inspiring talk. But rest assured, we will continue following the topics raised on the security side here in our future Space Café web talks and in our magazine. For all of you that are still interested or continue have an interest to talk to us, we will start our Clubhouse launch in a few minutes. For all of you, again, it's Space Café in extra 33 minutes. It's a new platform also for us, so we experiment with that. So apologize that the agenda you will see for the next weeks is pretty full. So next week, my guest will be Nikolai Christoph from the World Economics Forum. This gentleman leads the space sector at WEF and can give us an outlook what WEF is thinking to tackle all these strategic topics, or important topic, not strategic necessarily, and how to deal with it. A week later, on the 2nd of March, I will talk with Blaine Corsier, and you might know him as hashtag the China Space Guy, and we will talk about, yes, of course, China's space developments. And on the 4th of March, we will launch our Space Café Germany, and I'm super excited that my good friend Andreas Schepers will host it, and his first guest will be Dr. Walter Pelzer, the board member of the DLR, the German Aerospace Center. One day later, we will start launch the Space Café Russia by Elena Morozova, and her first guest will be Dr. Olga Wolinskaya. Also, that is super exciting, and you see we are increasing the frequencies of our great programs. And another 33-minute on the 9th of March, I will do with Shirley Brunswick from the Space Foundation. And 2 days later, we will have our next Space Café Black Ops by Ralph Thiele in the planning. All the events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, or LinkedIn. Send us a pigeon, a wire, whatever it is. But we listen to you. Don't forget to sign up to our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global. And I know I repeat myself, but we need your support. Thank you very much for your interest today. And thank you, especially Jessica, for this inspiring talk and being my guest today. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing their great job week by week, day by day, almost again. And I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next week. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And hope to hear you at Clubhouse in a moment. Don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll see everybody soon at one of these fabulous events. Absolutely. And now, jumping on another wire to Lausanne right now. Okay, take care. Jessica, thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone. Ciao. Bye-bye. Thanks for attending.